Welcome back, everyone. Today we're making a mini sling bag. And this bag measures in at 8.5 by 6 by 2.5. It has a zip pocket in the back, up top, and a flat pocket up front, making it the perfect bag for all your daily essentials. This project is on the easier side, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the PDF pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need a 1/2 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These are all very durable fabrics and they're easy to work with. I'm actually gonna be using 2 different fabrics, an upholstery fabric and also a denim. So like always, get creative with it and use a fabric that's really gonna make your design come together. You'll need a 1/2 yard for your secondary fabric, and this is gonna be for the lining. So I recommend using something lightweight. I'm gonna be using a nylon material. I really like using nylon on the inside of the bag. It makes for a nice look and a durable finish. You'll need 1.5 to 2 yards of 1.5 inch webbing. This is gonna be used for the main strap. Going along with that webbing, you'll need 1 lobster clasp and 1 strap slider. And both of these you want to be 1.5 inch width to match your 1.5 inch width webbing. So if you do change the width of your webbing for the main strap, make sure you change your lobster clasp and your strap slider. You'll need 2 12-inch or longer zippers. I'm gonna be cutting mine off of a zipper roll. I found this was a really great way to go because you can cut your zippers precisely and minimize the waste. But if you're buying yours at the store, just make sure you get 12-inch or longer because we will be trimming them down. You'll need a 1/4 yard of 3/4 to 1 inch width webbing. This is gonna be used for the sides to hold the D-ring so you can clip your lobster clasp to it. So you just need a little amount. Going along with that webbing, you'll need 2 matching D-rings. So whatever width you choose for that webbing, you'll also wanna choose the same width D-ring. But we'll get more into this once we get started. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape your pattern together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is gonna allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. And once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. And from here, we're gonna cut on the outside of the black line. And after cutting out your pattern, you should end up with 2 strap panels cut out of your main fabric. 2 back bottom zipper panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 back top zipper panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 back left side panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 back right side panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 4 zipper side panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. 2 side bottom panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 to 4 back main panels, all cut out of your secondary fabric. 2 front pocket bottom panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front pocket top panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. And lastly, 2 foam interfacing panels cut out of your foam material or your interfacing. And this insert is optional. It's going to give structure to the bag, but if you're using a heavyweight fabric, there's no need for it. So it really comes down to preference on what style bag you want to make, and we'll get more into that later on. Moving on to assembly, start by grabbing your back top and bottom zipper panels and 1 of your 12-inch zippers. And this zipper can be smaller than 12 inches. You can trim it down if you're using a roll, but we're going to be placing it up against the back panels. So you want it to be at least the same height as the back main panel. We're going to be placing the top and bottom zipper panels directly on top of the zipper, and to figure out where to place them, we're going to be using the back right side panel as a reference. Locate the zipper edge and place it directly in the center of the zipper. The top portion of the panel has the larger curve, and that's where we're going to be lining up the back top zipper panel. Do the same thing for the bottom zipper panel on the opposite side. And the goal is to get these zipper panels to line up exactly with the outside edge of the back right panel. And real quick, the width of these panels, you can adjust it because you want it to be the exact width of your zipper, and not all zippers are the same width. So if you need to trim it or make them a little bit wider, that's totally fine. But anyways, moving on, we're just gonna play around with it until we get that right measurement and line it up with the outside edge. So just starting with the main fabric, we're gonna place it right side on the zipper and then fold it back and forth until we find that sweet spot. Do the same thing for the opposite side. And the right side of your main fabric should be to the right side of the zipper. Once you found the right spot, we're gonna grab the secondary fabric and place it on the opposite side of the zipper, sandwiching the zipper in between both of the panels. Pin all the layers together and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Remember to go slow when you're going over the zipper track. Fold the wrong sides together, lining up the outside edge. And before we add a top stitch to both panels, we want to first grab the back right panel and make sure the outside edges line up exactly with the back right panel. If they don't line up perfectly, you can dethread and try it again. With the wrong sides together, place a few pins and add a top stitch to both of the side edges. And you can put this stitch as close as you want to the zipper edge. At this point, it's best to snip the zipper ends flush with the seam allowance. But if everything is looking good, we can slide the zipper up and grab the back right side panel. Just like in the previous step, we're going to locate the zipper edge on the right side panel, and we're going to simply sew the zipper to that edge. But before we do that, we want to make sure we have the top zipper panel lined up with the top edge of the back right panel. Move the secondary fabric to the side, place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric, and the right side of the secondary fabric to the wrong side of the zipper. Line up the top and bottom edge and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing the stitch, double check all the layers, make sure everything got stitched together, flip the wrong sides together. Try to line up the outside edge of the secondary fabric and the main fabric as good as possible, and then add a top stitch to the zipper edge. And I'm using an edge presser foot. It helps get a nice even stitch along that zipper edge. From here, we're going to grab the back left side panel and essentially do the exact same thing on the opposite side of the zipper. Locate the zipper edge, place the right side of the main fabric to the right side of the zipper, and the right side of the secondary fabric to the wrong side of the zipper. Line up the outside edges and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After completing the stitch, double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together, flip the wrong sides up, line up the outside edge, and since this is a shorter panel, it's best to place a few pins so it doesn't flop around as you're sewing. Add a top stitch to the zipper edge. And that's going to complete the back panel assembly. Before we move on, we want to snip the zipper ends flush if you didn't already do that. And another good thing to do is to grab the back main panel and place it directly on top of this panel and make sure the outside edges are the same width and height. Go ahead and place this panel off to the side and grab your front pocket top panel and your front pocket bottom panel. And for the first step, we're going to place the right sides together and do the same thing for the front pocket bottom panel. Locate the edges that line up, and we're going to stitch both of these edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Quickly check to make sure the layers are fully stitched and lined up, place the wrong sides together, add a couple pins to secure the layers together, and repeat this process for the opposite panel. Using the pattern, we're going to locate the top stitch guide, and this is where we're going to be adding our 2 top stitches. One right up next to the edge and one in about a 1/2 inch. Feel free to add a decorative stitch or even add more than 2 stitches. Place the top panel on top of the bottom panel. We want this new panel to be the same height as the back panel, so we're going to use the back main panel as a reference. Line up the top and bottom edges, and that will give you the perfect front panel assembly height. To keep it from moving all around, we're going to add a pin and tack stitch both of the sides as close as we can to that outside edge. And this will become our front pocket assembly. As you can see, it's a simple, easy flat pocket, but if you want to add a button or a snap, you can totally do that because there's enough overlap in between the panels to do so. Moving on, grab your foam interfacing panel and your back main panel. And what we're going to do is go over this step because not everyone is going to use the foam insert, but I do want to show how to add it if you're interested. And I'm using a really thick adhesive interfacing. It's great for adding structure, and we're going to place that directly on top of the back main panel. Notice the interfacing panel is smaller and it's on the inside of the seam allowance for the back main panel. That's how your fabric and your interfacing should line up. If it's not lining up like that, you need to trim the interfacing. If you're using an adhesive interfacing, you press it on at this point so it doesn't move around and it stays centered. After pressing, we're going to grab one more back panel, place it directly on top, and we're going to stitch around the outside edge, locking all these layers together. I'm not going to stitch the layers together because the fabric I'm using is super thick and I don't want to make it too thick where I can't add the double fold bias tape at the end. So this is something to keep in mind if you're using a thicker fabric. For example, when all these layers are together, it's going to make that front pocket very structured. Real quick, let's go over that one more time so it's not so confusing. Lay 2 back main panels out, place the interfacing or foam directly in the center, press it down. Place a second layer of your back main fabric over top and stitch around the outside edge, locking all the layers together. And from here, we're going to grab our front and back assembly, place it directly on top, and tack stitch the top, bottom, and side edges. Again, just to lock all these layers together and make it easier to add the side panel on in later steps. But for everyone not adding interfacing, you can place the interfacing off to the side and 2 of the back main panels. Place the front and back assembly on top of the back main panels and add a tack stitch to the top, bottom, and side edges. Or if you really want to be persistent, you can add a stitch all the way around the outside edge as close as you can to that edge. And this panel is essentially going to be our divider for the front and back pocket. Quickly double check to make sure all the outside edges are lined up, and if they are, place these panels off to the side and grab your side zipper panels and your second 12-inch zipper. And again, we want the zipper just to be longer than the width of the side zipper panels because we will be trimming the ends down in future steps. Locate the zipper edge on the side zipper panel, and to start, we can place one main panel and one secondary panel off to the side. Place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric and the secondary fabric on back, lining up the outside edges, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Quickly check to see if all the layers got stitched together and the top edges lined up, and place the wrong sides together. And the goal is to keep it out of the way, so place a few pins, move it off to the side, and grab your second side zipper panel, and do the same thing on the opposite side of the zipper, lining up the outside edges, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Quickly check to make sure all the layers are lined up and stitched together. Fold the panels out with the wrong sides together. With everything lined up, we're going to add a top stitch to both sides of the zipper. If you struggle with getting a nice neat top stitch, I highly recommend looking into an edge presser foot. This will become our side zipper panel assembly. Slide it up and grab your side bottom panel. We'll be sewing the side edges together, so place the right side of the main fabric together and the right side of the secondary fabric together. Stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Open up the panel so the right sides are facing out. Pull the bottom side panel down as far as possible, and we're going to add a top stitch on the zipper end. Check it, make sure it looks good. If it's looking good, we're going to grab the opposite side of the bottom side panel, place the right sides together on the opposite side of the zipper assembly, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the right sides out, find the side that does not have the top stitch. Pull the two panels away from one another so the edge lines up, and add your top stitch. And that's going to complete your side panel, and it's going to become your side panel assembly. It can be fairly tricky to sew on as is with the layers flapping around. So I'm going to quickly show you a technique to fix this and make it easier to sew the side panels to the main panel. And it's really simple. We're just adding a serge around the outside edge. If you don't have a serger, all you have to do is switch your machine to a zigzag stitch and stitch directly on top of that edge. This will also prevent future fraying and overall make for a stronger finished product. And you don't have to do this step, it's optional, but for now you can place the side panel assembly off to the side and grab your strap panels. Along with the strap panels, we're going to grab our 1.5 inch webbing. I cut my strip just under 2 yards. It's better to go a little bit longer, and then you can trim it down after you try the bag on. But if you already know your preferred length, just cut your strip at that measurement. Shift the webbing to one of the ends. Place the right side of the strap panel underneath the webbing, lining the webbing up in the center of the panel, and place the opposite panel directly on top with right sides together. Shift the panel down the webbing about 2 inches, keeping the webbing lined up in the center, and stitch the outside edge, leaving the front flat edge open. And we're stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to flip the right sides out. If you need to, grab a pair of scissors to help poke out all of the edges. And the more webbing you have on the inside of the strap, the stronger it will be. From here, we're going to add a top stitch around the outside edge. And it is really important to go over that strap maybe a couple times, even if it's just the top stitch, because it's going to lock it down. You can do a box stitch, you can do an X stitch. Anything extra will make it way more durable. Slide this panel to the side and grab your back panel assembly. We'll be stitching the strap to this panel. To help line it up, we're going to grab the back main panel, and at the top it has a strap placement guide. Feel free to reference that or just place it directly in the center on the top edge. Make sure it's hanging off the top edge about a 1/4 inch, and if you're using webbing that has a front and a back, you'll want the front to be facing you so it faces outwards when the bag is done. Double check to make sure it's in the center and stitch as close as you can to the outside edge. And we're just tacking this down so it stays centered when we're adding the side panel. I like to roll up the webbing and add a couple rubber bands so it stays out of the way. Next, grab 2 strips of 4-inch webbing, and this will be from our 3/4 to 1 inch width webbing. Going along with that webbing, you'll need 2 D-rings, and you want the width of these D-rings to match the width of your webbing. Feed the webbing strip through your D-ring. This is going to become the clip for your strap, so if you want to use something other than webbing and a D-ring, feel free. Place the webbing and D-ring set on the bottom side edge. If you need help, refer to the back main panel and locate the webbing placement guide. And realistically, you can place these at any point along that side edge, but typically the bag sits flatter when it's located towards the bottom corner. You can also play around with how far you want the webbing to stick out. There's a lot of little customizations you can make, but once you've found the spot you want, we're going to tack stitch it down as close as we can to the outside edge. And don't trim the webbing ends just yet, we'll do that in future steps. Grab your side assembly and mark out the centers on the zipper side and the bottom side panel. Do the same thing for the back assembly. With the centers marked, we're going to place the right sides together. Keep in mind the zipper end will be placed on the top side of the back assembly. And just place that side panel around the outside edge of the back assembly. I like to place at least 4 pins to make sure the panel lines up perfectly with the outside edge, and from here we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And take your time with this step, you don't want the 2 panels to become unaligned as you're sewing. After stitching, flip the right sides out, double check to make sure all the layers got stitched together and the back assembly is lined up in the center of that side assembly. If it's looking good, grab the front assembly, mark the centers on the top and the bottom edge, and essentially we're going to do the exact same thing. Line up the centers, place a few pins, and stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's always a good thing to check your machine too, because sometimes both sides aren't feeding through at the same rate, and this will cause the panels to become unaligned and a gap at the end. But anyways, after finishing up the stitch, we're going to check all the way around the outside edge, make sure all the layers got stitched together, flip the right sides out and do the same thing. Closely inspect the seams, the corners, and everything else. If it's looking good, we're going to flip the wrong sides back out. This next step is optional. We're going to be cleaning up the inside edges, starting by cutting everything flush with the seam allowance, including the webbing and the top strap panel. Also, if any of the corners are sticking out just a little bit too much, trim everything flush so it's all even around the outside edge. Because we're going to be adding double-sided bias tape, and that's going to clean up that raw edge on the inside of the bag. When it comes to adding the bias tape, I'm going to run you through a few different techniques so that way everyone can do it. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. And you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. I'm going to be using the double fold bias tape attachment. By far, this is the most efficient technique, so if you plan on making a lot of these bags, you might want to look into this option. And as you can see, it totally cleans up and makes that raw edge disappear, giving you a nice, clean, professional finish. This step can be a little bit tricky, but just try it a few times. Don't let it get you down, because you will eventually figure it out. But anyways, flip the right sides out, spin the bag around to the webbing, unroll it, and lay it out flat with right sides facing up. Find your 1.5 inch lobster clasp and strap slider. And if you use a different width webbing, just make sure you match the width of these to the width of your webbing. Feed the webbing through the strap slider and move it down about 40 inches or so. Feed the end through the opening on your lobster clasp. Pull the webbing end back down and feed it through the bottom side of your strap slider from the back side to the front side. And we're going to be looping the webbing around that center bar on the strap slider. And if you want, you can give yourself a little bit more slack so it's easier to tack stitch that webbing end down. But what you want to do is roll that webbing end down and add a tack stitch. Feel free to add more than just a tack stitch. You can add an X or a box. The more you add, the stronger it will be. But as you can see, all you have to do is slide that strap adjuster up or down to adjust the strap. Clip the lobster clasp to the D-ring of your preference. Try the bag on, and if it's too much strap, you can de-thread it and trim it down to your exact measurements. But that's why I always recommend using a little bit more, because you can always trim it back and then use that measurement for future bags. Moving on to the final step, and that's adding your branding. I used leather strips. I also added an extra D-ring on the leather strip to clip a water bottle to, and used the same strips to make zipper pulls. So get creative with it and make the branding unique to your style. And real quick, if you're looking to modify the size, it's really easy to change the width, height, or depth by just scaling down or scaling up the panels and then matching the circumference of the outside edge to the circumference of the side panels. And there you have it, your mini sling bag is complete. Hopefully you found this tutorial to be helpful and your bag turned out good. Sometimes they don't always turn out great the first try. When it comes to sewing bags, you might have to try it a couple times or work with different fabrics to really fine tune and perfect that look. But with time, it will get better and you can transfer all these skills over into all your other sewing projects. With that being said, I'd love to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. And until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.